Hello, welcome to another episode of Run, Walk, Talk, Tales of Inclusion and Development. I'm Steph Redivo and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm here with Judy Borovich and her pronouns are she and her. We're really looking forward to the session today. We're talking about data, and we've decided actually we're going to make this actually a two-part series. So today we're going to talk about data and learning, and then next time we're going to talk about data and equity, diversity, and inclusion, because we realize there's lots to talk about when we discuss data. So, Judy, you ready? Are we going to jump into this?
Let's jump right in. Let's go for it.
Okay, so the very first question, and I think all of our listeners would be curious to know about, is why is data important in learning?
Well, I mean, I've been in learning and development for over 25 years, and I can still remember a time where the data that we collected was pretty basic, right? And I mean, if we think back to L&D 25 years ago, a lot of it was simply instructor-led sessions, and they were in-person instructor-led sessions. And so we were really interested in, how many people were coming to the session. And then we all know about the smile sheets that you get at the end of a session. And we were curious, did people like the session? And, when people would rank a session high, hopefully it was because of the instructor and because of the content that was offered, and what they were learning was something that they could use back at their desk, at the workplace. But it also could have had to do, the cookies that were served in the session they liked, right? So we've come a long way since then. I think the learning and development space has become a lot more complex in the last 25 years. We now have instructor-led sessions, to be sure, but we have instructor-led in person. We've got instructor-led virtual. Typically, learning that is offered within corporations is blended. So we have online modules, we've got micro-learning, we've got gamification, we've got instructor or tip sheets rather that people can read. And we want to be able to collect information on all of those. And I believe wholeheartedly that it's really important to know who is coming to the sessions.
Right.
It's also really important to know who's not taking part in the learning and development that's being offered in an organization, because we want to know, who aren't we reaching, and if we're not reaching them, why aren't we reaching them? And I also think it's really important to know, are people actually, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure in the workplace that what we're teaching and the information that we're giving to people is actually relevant and they can be using it on the job. So it's really important to look at, from a performance perspective, when people are coming to our sessions, is the information that they're learning applicable to what they're doing day to day? Are they actually able to use it? And so I think that data is critical because it gives us that information. It tells us who's coming to the sessions, and at its best, are they actually able to use what they've learned in the session on the job, and are we giving them a return on investment ultimately for the business? Like, are we able to save the business dollars in terms of efficiency because of what we've offered in the classroom? I'll pause there, Steph, because you can, and we talk about data a lot outside of podcast world. We like to talk about it. So yeah, it's definitely something that's on my mind.
I mean, you brought up this really interesting point around sort of what your responsibility is, and to sort of, it sounds like this behavior change as a facilitator or whoever's doing the training or education. How do you measure that so that, somebody's come in to do a training, that, walk me through an example if you can. I'd be curious.
Yeah, and I would say it goes beyond the facilitator role, right? Like, when I think of a facilitator, like, absolutely you want to be making sure that whatever it is that you're facilitating and offering is transferable. I also think, though, it really goes to, as learning and development professionals, there's also that performance piece. We also want to be performance specialists. We want to make sure that people can actually perform and do something, when they leave our classroom, or, view an online learning module or view a tip sheet. And so I think that it's very critical, first and foremost, to know, and this goes to the business and the business
Mhm.
outcomes. What is the role of the individual who's coming to training?
Yeah.
And to me, that goes to, for their manager, what is the expectation of what that person's going to be doing on the job?
Mhm.
And once I know that, then I can start to develop learning that will actually start to move and change the behavior of the person. So I think it's critical for learning and development to have a really close relationship with, the leadership, the managers and directors of the people, so that we know, what is expected of them, and that we can make sure that whatever is expected of them when they're coming to training, we're actually personalizing and matching the training, the learning,
Mhm.
to what they're actually expected to do on the job.
Which is interesting because I think for most of us, potentially, our job is kind of, it goes way beyond the job description, right? If you were to
Hmm.
pull up your job description of when you were hired, is that all you do? Probably not. So that's kind of an interesting sort of dynamic there. Um, let's talk about some of the challenges, right? Or some of the kind of the what are some of the pitfalls that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about data when it comes to learning?
Yeah, well, I think there's a variety of pitfalls, and I want to just back up a little bit as well, because I think that this goes to what a potential pitfall could be. And that
Hmm.
is, before we offer any training or learning, making sure that whatever we're going to be offering, like whatever we're going to be designing, it's actually a learning problem in the first place.
Right.
So always thinking about, if somebody comes to me and says, and I think probably every person who's in learning and development has experienced this at once. Somebody comes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, we need to send everybody on my team for, Excel training. Everybody's got to learn how to use
Mhm.
Excel. We got to send them for training." And the approach has been sometimes in the past for L&D to just kind of, okay, we'll create a class, we'll send everybody
Right.
to it, and then the problem isn't solved. Like, people are still doing whatever it is that they
Yeah.
were doing incorrectly, or they're not doing whatever it is that their manager hoped that they would do. And it could be because maybe the problem isn't with that, people don't know how to use Excel. It may be that there's something wrong with the process in the first place.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, I think it's really important for learning and development to really work with the person who's requesting the training to find out, is it really a training need? Is training really going to solve the problem? Is it a process issue? Is there something else going on? Are people resisting it or working around the process because the process doesn't make sense or it takes too much time? So I think that if we're going to collect data and we're
Mhm.
going to look at, is the training having an impact, we have to make sure first that we're actually solving what we're making sure that we're solving for the actual problem, not the perceived problem. And that can take a little bit of time to sift through and
And I think that
determine.
is, yeah, and I think that is such an important part because, being in learning and development years ago, I used to hear that all the time, that there was a problem. I think automatically our minds go to, oh, we just need a training or an education or another
Yep,
session on this, or we just need to repeat this again. Um, and unfortunately, I think also some organizations just do that. They're like, okay, come through this training again, and it doesn't sort of solve the problem until you sort of get to the heart of it, right?
absolutely. And that's always, it's interesting you said repeat the training, because that's where I'm like, if why are we're going to repeat it and suddenly we're going to expect everybody to, like, they
I
took it the
know.
first time, they're not doing what we wanted them to do, so we're going to try again one more time.
Try again.
And so I think that we can sometimes use, if there is data
Hmm.
in L&D, to do a little bit of uncovering of what might the actual issue really be. And so it might be with, collecting qualitative data. Maybe we're
Yeah.
speaking to individuals on the job and shadowing them and finding out, why aren't you following the process that you're supposed to be following? If it's somebody saying we need everybody to learn Excel, what specifically do we need them to learn how to do? What is it that they
Hmm.
aren't doing? And then speaking to some of the people on the job to find out, because I've also had the experience where sometimes people think we need to send everybody for training, And when we do a little bit of digging, it turns out that maybe there's 1 or 2 people on a team of
Right.
50 who don't know
That's
how
right.
to do a particular task. And I'm always like, we don't need to then send everybody through training. So I think that data can help us uncover
Hmm.
in some instances, or certainly we can use data, we can collect data,
Okay.
qualitative data to find out, what is the reason that people aren't doing something that we're expecting them to.
Okay. Last question I have for you. Best practices on collecting data in learning and development. Sort of what are the, if somebody's listening, they haven't been collecting data in learning and development and they want to start, what do they do? Where do they go?
Yeah, well, that's a huge question. And I would say if somebody hasn't been collecting any data, I mean, I would start by asking them, what sort of systems do they have in place and what might they start to leverage? And so I'd be thinking of having conversations with people in their organization to
Hmm.
find out what data are we already collecting,
Hmm.
what might I have access to? So, as an example, I mean, many organizations will have a learning management system, and that can be a really great way of starting to collect data. I would also say start to have conversations with people in your talent and HR departments to find out what are they tracking and what might you be able to leverage. I mean, I think of the old days where we would just collect everything on spreadsheets and we would use Excel to track who had come to sessions. Fortunately, today technology has advanced. Um, you might start to speak to your friends in IT, in information technology, and find out, what can I collect if we've got a company intranet and you've got people going to the intranet to look for tip sheets or watch videos. Can I start to glean and get data from that system? So, I mean, if you're just starting out and you haven't been collecting anything, I think that you want to start having conversations with some of your folks in IT and HR talent and find out, what are they collecting and what systems might you be able to use to collect the data.
That's great. So as we wrap, my sort of one takeaway that I really, for me, that was really important was digging deeper, right? To see if that a training is really needed and actually finding sort of the root cause. I think that was a really great sort of nugget of information today. So,
Well, thanks, Steph. And I just want to end with too, because I get super excited and
yeah.
I'm like, oh, we still have a couple minutes left. I think as well, it really is, if you're new to data, recognizing that it's a huge area and there's all sorts of information out there. And it's really important to speak with people who are experts in data
Hmm.
and in data
Hmm.
analysis, because even once you start getting that data, as just collecting the data is one thing, and then actually
Yes,
doing the analysis of the data is a
that's
whole
right.
other area entirely, and it requires a different level and subject matter expertise. So
Hmm.
if you're at a place where you're not collecting data or you're just starting to, read as much as you possibly can. There's all sorts of books and great articles and all sorts of information, and perhaps we can post. I'll pick some of my favorite articles on L&D
Hmm.
and data, and we can include it with the podcast posting.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Judy. Really appreciate it. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Thanks, everybody.